Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, June 18th, 2026, episode 524. It's not Sunday, so this is not a Jesus Day episode, but I'm trying to get back in the saddle of doing my daily podcast action. I took a little time off after 3 years of middle school education. Uh, yeah, just take a break from that. It really is a demanding schedule. I'll say here what I've been saying for the last 3 years, that a lot of professors, they'll complain about the workload at the university, which, maybe, but really professors are basically in charge of their own workload. If they want to lessen it or reduce it, they just have to give fewer assignments, change the syllabus around within the guidelines of their department or the requirements of the university, etc. But professors really are the number one reason why certain professors believe that they are overworked because they assign a lot of stuff. So one might want to try to reevaluate how one makes assignments. But compared to what needs to be done at the middle school or the high school level, especially with a subject like mathematics, the preparation involved, then trying to identify what problems are, why aren't people understanding what you're saying, and how to make adjustments on the fly, taking into consideration generational differences, also the changing morality standards, expectations, and even life goals of young people today. All of that together kind of, kind of uh, forces teachers to have to make adjustments if they really care about their students. And that's what I tried to do. So a lot of my time was taken up just trying to come up with ways to present the material so that it is learned by the students. Well, anyway, so that's now in the past. Learned a lot, obviously, but now I'm prepping for the fall. And I mentioned before that I currently have an adjunct position, a part-time teaching position lined up at a university, and hoping for more. And maybe I'll have more news on that later. But anyway, so I'm prepping for the fall to get back in the university mode. And so I'm rereading some of the stuff that I've written in the past. And one line that I wrote, which made me chuckle, is that taking a class with me is basically equal opportunity to be offended. And I would say that several times during the semester as well. And some students would happily, proudly, at the end of the semester, email me and say that they were never offended through the whole semester, as if it was an achievement. So it was kind of funny. But I'm going through the interview process, interviewing at various places, and the it's interesting, the whole process, how much it has changed over the years. Or maybe I never knew how to do it correctly in the first place. But one of my kids is applying also to teaching jobs, except he has a lot of mentors giving him tips and advice. And one of the things that they all say, including the online application guides, is that you got to put keywords in there. So some institutions, because they get so many applications, they're running them through algorithms, and so they're looking for certain keywords. You also want to front load relevant skills to the topic. In other words, you can't use the same CV for every position you're applying to. You have to make subtle changes here and there to get the attention of people who are either reading the application or putting it through an algorithm. The second thing that I thought was kind of interesting was the interest in the concept of hypocrisy. So I was of the mindset that I'm never going to get an interview, so why not just let it all hang out in my cover letter, which, chances are they're never going to read. because they're just going to put it through an algorithm, whatever, and they'll decide early on that I'm not a good candidate. So I just put everything in this cover letter, not holding back too much, but just sparing on the detail. But I would put in the component of hypocrisy. I would talk about hypocrisy and how I would use that as a way to get people to have a conversation with each other, recognizing and understanding what hypocrisy is, and how we all don't like it. So let's proceed from that starting point, a position where there's no hypocrisy. And so that was kind of really interesting how people were curious about that. Whereas in my previous institution, no interest at all. They didn't care about that. All they cared about was, are you teaching what we expect you to teach? That's pretty much all there was. And so one interviewer asked me how I taught race. No one has ever asked me that before. I thought that was kind of interesting. And you would only ask that if you recognize that there are different ways of approaching the concept of race. So I thought I'd talk about that a little bit since it would just happen recently, is difference between collectivism and the individual. So when one teaches the prevalent, prevailing, uh, basic race theory, uh, you're basically focusing on generalization or categorization. The contrast to that would be to focus on the individual. So group thinking versus individual. And it turns out, and I've said this before, but Ayn Rand uh, had come up with this idea of the individual being the smallest minority. I say the same thing, except I got to it from I got there with a different road, but I've talked about that elsewhere. So the smallest minority. So either you're going to talk in terms of a group or you're going to have discussions from the starting point of the individual. And if you're going to talk about individuals in society, you have to understand and explain the subjectivity of knowledge, that each person has their own unique way of looking at the world. And each of us have our truths that, unless we're convinced otherwise, we're all going to have different opinions, different value systems, different objectives, different likes, preferences, etc. And some of the factors that go into to create diversity in these different subjectivities is our own personal experience, the lives that that we lived, who our parents were, our cultural background, our socioeconomic background, the neighborhood that we grew up in, or the lack thereof. And then there are the objectives that we have for ourselves, personal objectives, personal agenda. And then finally, another major component of influence when it comes to our own subjectivity is our family relationships, positive, negative, and the ones that we have now, the ones that we have at the moment, right? Assuming that you're no longer a child, but maybe you are a parent. Perhaps you're an older single person. I mean, what place do those family relations or even close friends, if you have any, uh, how do they influence the way that you see the world? Now, the funny thing that I always observe about so-called radicals, right, people who believe that they are radical, is that they are extremely superficial. And so they are passionately narrow-minded. So superficiality and narrow-mindedness are, I think, opposite sides of the same coin. They're not thinking very deeply. They're not thinking broadly. All they know is their own subjectivity. And it's from that perspective, it's really, really easy to think that you're right because no one else, any information that anyone else has, any information that comes from a different perspective is irrelevant. All that exists, all that is important is their own subjectivity. And you can see, I've explained that in various ways over the years. But if you can kind of see how very narrowly focused that way of thinking is. And so, although they might think that they are radical, they're extremely superficial. In this so-called narrow subjectivity, it's easy to believe that you have the right answer, you're on the right side, particularly if you are hopping on the trendy train, then chances are you'll have legal backing. You'll have the force of law behind you, which gives you power. It empowers you to be able to say what you say without fear of reprisal or repercussion. And it sort of gives you license then to attack other people. So everyone else is wrong or evil. But again, it's not radical. It doesn't get to the root, right? So radical, if you remember your math, the square root, right? You're trying to get to the root or the heart of the matter. And so these fake radicals are not radical at all. They don't get to the heart of the problem. Narrow subjectivity, another problem of having a very narrow focus, being narrow-minded, is that you ignore outliers, you ignore exceptions. And because you're ignoring what turns out to be many, many people, there's a tremendous amount of collateral damage. And people with the narrow subjectivity, you don't care about what happens to these outliers because they don't matter. What's important is your fixation, your goal, whatever is in your narrow subjectivity. So people who are like that do not consider consequences. They do not consider unintended consequences. That is, what else happens on the road to you trying to achieve your goal. And generally, it takes a very, very long time for anyone to realize the damage that they've caused because in this type of society where subjectivity laws are written based on narrow subjectivity, the costs are socialized, are spread out. So the true cost of welfare is spread out to all of society. The true cost of war is spread out to all parts of society. And so it's not just the people who are engaging in that behavior that has to pay for it, but we all do. And that's the problem. You have this narrow subjectivity. You then have the power to legislate morality, and you spread out the cost. And so you yourself, if you are the narrow-minded person, you never actually get the full brunt of the costs. You never have to pay out of pocket. So it's easy to be part of that kind of group. There's safety in numbers, the trend is your friend. But at the same time, you erase individuals. You erase, and I'm using that word deliberately. To erase is in the postmodernist vocabulary. Erasing is a very horrible thing to do, and yet uh, that's what they do, right? So the people who will demonize the process of erasing, of ignoring, of not counting, of dehumanizing, they do it a lot. They erase individuals. They erase the outliers, the details, the difference, people who don't fit the paradigm. And it's just kind of hypocritical, you see. So and so to do that, to have this narrow subjectivity, to get a lot of people on board, to have a movement or some kind of activism, political activism that's based on a very narrow subjectivity, eventually you will have a lot of dissatisfaction, you'll have disillusionment, there's a lot of hypocrisy, and eventually you'll see violence and war. And we are actually living through that. If you have been awake over the last 30 years, you can see this gradual march towards violence and war. It's, you know, at the same time, there is violence and war, right? The United States has been in perpetual war. At the same time, the methods of getting people riled up to hate a certain group of people has been developing. So more and more people and more of society is trapped into that way of thinking. Now, in contrast to this, To be truly radical, uh, that's you have to get to the place where divergence starts, where diversity starts. In other words, you have to be able to include and explain outliers, and you have to consider consequences. Because the consequences of your actions are signals, they're messages to tell you, to let you know you're on the right track or you're not on the right track. And these consequences often appear in terms of cost, responsibility, liability. So are the results more costly? Do they create more problems, more expenses for people than other solutions? And because that responsibility, that liability is on the person who's making these choices, then you are sort of incentivized to consider other choices because it's too expensive. You don't, and it's not what you wanted. The results are not what you wanted. And so now you're going to try to think of other things. And the better you are at planning, the more that you see the potential downside risks, the potential costs, the potential liability, the clearer those um, possibilities are. And so you're going to try to figure out if there are safer choices, if there are less expensive choices within your reach. So to be able to do this, you are going to empower individuals through independent thought and personal choice rather than telling everyone, oh, this is the right answer. Everyone just do this and all our problems are solved. Instead of doing that, what you do is you try to get people to understand consequences of choices, to try to figure out what the consequences might be, what possible outcomes might be, and then allow people the power to choose. Groups of people may make the same choice, independently of each other. So, for example, I used to always say this in the classroom. If you look at any given class, yeah, there are a lot of people in that classroom, but each of them went through a different thought process to make the choice of taking that class. And after the class is over, everyone goes uh, on their own individual path. Like it is, unless you're friends already and you share the same schedule, chances are when you move from class to class, you're going to different destinations. And so that together moment, that moment of commonality, of being a group, is just a moment. It's fleeting. And it's a mistake to believe that everyone in the room then is unified in everything in all of their lives. To have a longer commitment, right, where two people with two different subjectivities then decide that no, they are going to walk the path of life together, like marriage. Well, there now it's a totally different ball game. It makes this prospect of marriage um, it makes it a little bit different, right? It like what are you actually deciding to do is different from what most other people are saying and describing, which is probably why no one comes to me for marriage counseling advice. But really, what you're doing is, you could say, oh, if you love each other, sure. But really, what's happening is two different independent subjectivities are now going to uh, sort of try to put that in the back seat and rethink subjectivity from the context of a small collective, a couple, a family, right? And it changes everything. And so it's kind of silly to think that you can enjoy all of the same things you did before marriage after marriage. It's just kind of not realistic. I mean, it might happen, but there's other things that are going on. So if you allow people, individuals, choice, then you're going to have different choices. You're going to have more numerous choices than is possible than is legal in a collective. Um, so you have diversity of choices versus few choices. You have uncertain outcomes versus lots of problems. When you force everyone to make the same choice, whether they want to or not, because this is the law, then you're going to have many, many problems. You're going to have a lot of dissatisfaction. Um, think of the policy of war, right? Most people in America have no idea what really is going on in the Middle East. And they want to take the view that they trust the people in charge, that they know what they're doing. But if you really understood what was going on, few people would actually go out to fight, right? Oh, my kids are sick. I'm not going to go to war. Oh, my kids need me. My family needs me. Uh, my church needs me, whatever. People are going to come up with lots of different reasons not to go out to fight. And I would say that pro-war people who do not sign up are either chickens, lack imagination, or they're just simply propagandized, where they believe that they can be keyboard warriors, say that this war should be fought, and not lift a finger to actually put their life on the line because other people are going to do it. So it's so easy to do that. So, collectivism allows people to ignore the cost, the actual cost of war, because they get to sit at home. But in reality, if someone knocked on your door and said, "Do you support the war?" All right, then you have to go out and fight. No matter what your age or gender is, you got to go out. Few people would actually do it, right? Foolish people would agree to go. Irresponsible people would go, but otherwise, few people would go. This is why governments must lie and force people to go. Um, Otherwise, they wouldn't go. And the wars themselves, tremendous amount of destruction, death, and unintended consequences. I mean, without directly referencing it, the conclusion of the Iran war between the United States, Israel, and Iran is a perfect example of this. I mean, if you knew ahead of time, like many people did, that this was going to end in disaster, then you just don't even start it. But of course, hotter heads prevailed and the war happened, and here we are. And so, governments without an army, what are you going to do? What do nations have to do? If no one is willing to go fight in this war, to put their lives on the line because they know what's really going on, then governments and people learn to live together. In other words, if you do not have the power to view the world as a series of collectivist, uh, you know, groupings that, oh, that group of people over there needs to be killed, if you are liberated from that way of thinking and instead just now you look at people as individuals, well, then you learn to live together, right? If you go to war, then everyone suffers, including the innocent. So why would you want to do that? Why would you want to punish innocent people just because someone else said that's a small group of people need to be punished? It just makes no sense at all. And so, how do you learn to live together? How do you live together in peace? Through innovation and new ideas. That's the name of the game. That's something that I always say, even in my sermons, right? That the way that we resolve our issues, our problems, the difficulties in our lives is through creative thinking, coming up with better solutions, maybe solutions that previously existed but we didn't know about. It's okay to reinvent the wheel for ourselves. This is how we access more information. This is how we keep our lives moving forward. And so basically, just to wrap up this episode, subjectivity is an important phenomena. Understanding that we can only see the world from our position, from our perspective, uh, is important to understand because then we know that there's a lot of information that we don't know. There's a lot of things we probably misunderstand. things that we're ignorant of. And so we need to expand our horizons. We need to be able to have a lot of patience and tolerance, also the willingness to learn and to grow. So bad racial understanding is collectivism, and it leads to violence, loss of freedom, and eventually to all-out war. A good understanding, better understanding of race leads to flexibility, innovation, freedom, and overall satisfaction for more people. Yeah, so that's it for this episode. I'll probably continue to build on this, try to get my logical, sort of discussion-oriented chops back prior to getting back into the classroom. But that's it, and I will talk to you next time.